Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, viewers of all ages, this review of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory has been dedicated to Gene Wilder, who transcended the flesh a few days ago, and this movie review is dedicated to his memory. Out of all the installments starring Gene Wilder, whether it be a leading role or a supporting role, this film was the one I grew up with the most. From my early years of being a 7 to 8 year old boy to my most recent years as an adult, rewatching this film before making this review, this was definitely a film that stuck well with me throughout the years. And I can say with confidence that Willy Wonka is one of the finest and best roles that Gene Wilder has ever embodied. He really knew how to play with the boundless amount and gamut of human emotions, really giving off great subtleties and a lot of really great moments of hilarity, charm, and likability that make his character shine in his own special way. His performance was absolutely original in everything it presented itself to be. He was someone who was both mysterious yet very warm and very multidimensional, and he really knew how to balance the comic elements of this character to some of the more human elements of this character. You really feel for Willy Wonka and everything he has to go through, whether it be some of his deadpan moments with some of the kids getting themselves into a lot of trouble, to the final scene in which I dare not spoil, since this is a spoiler free review of this entire movie, and even to just a lot of the small moments, you could definitely see a lot of charisma, brilliance, charm, and everything that made Gene Wilder one of the most versatile actors and comedians of all time. He had class as Willy Wonka back then, and he had class, likability, and love as Willy Wonka to this very day. And he's been a part of all of our childhoods, and his performance rings really true and clear in our hearts. With that said, this is my review of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which was released in the United States on June 30, 1971, and it was also released 3 months later in the United Kingdom. It was directed by Mel Stewart. It was produced by Stan Margulis and David L. Wolper. It was written by David Seltzer and Roald Dahl. This was based on the Roald Dahl children's novel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The music was composed by Leslie Bricusse and Anthony Newley and Walter Scharf. The cinematography was done by Arthur Ibiston. It was edited by David Saxon, and it starred the talents of Gene Wilder, Jack Albertson, Peter Ostrom, Michael Bolna, Julie Don Cole, Denise Nickerson, Paris Themin, Ursula Wright, Roy Kinnear, Leonard Stone, Nora Denny, credited in this movie as Dodo Denny, Diana Soul, Dora Altman, Franziska Liebing, Ernst Ziegler, Aubrey Woods, David Batley, Gunther Meissner, Steve Dunn, Rusty Goff, Rudy Borgstaller, George Clayton, Malcolm Dixon, Ismeet Hassan, Norman McGlenn, Angelo Muscat, Pepe Poupé, Marcus Powell, and Albert Wilkinson. As I stated before, I was first introduced to the world of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory when I was 7 to 8 years old through a very wonderful and close family friend who introduced it to us via a VHS of this said film. And when we popped it into our VCR, I was completely engaged and completely enchanted to everything that the world of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory had to offer. It was definitely a really great film to really get myself into. I was totally charmed by the musical numbers, with my favorites being the Oompa Loompa song, which is definitely a major fan favorite, I Want It Now, sung by Veruca Salt, Cheer Up Charlie, sung by Mrs. Bucket, and of course, Pure Imagination, sung by Willy Wonka. I really grew up with this film, especially in my years as a 13-year-old boy, and I still found it very charming and extremely enjoyable. I never started reading the book until I was about in my late tweens, early teens, as in between the ages of 11 to 13. And I was sort of religiously reading the original novel by Roald Dahl when I was 13 in my old school. And I was quite interested with everything this book had to offer. And here's some really interesting trivia. Did you know that there was also a sequel to this installment called Charlie and the Glass Elevator? I was quite interested with the entire novel back then, and it was quite something that interested me, but also made me understood what Roald Dahl's creative mind was also trying to express in terms of certain pet peeves and just a lot of things that made him a very great mind in terms of children's literature, which is no surprise because a lot of Roald Dahl's works have also translated pretty well into film. However, this was a film that Roald Dahl did not really care for in particular, to the point where he even disowned the film, as he also originally wanted to cast another actor to play Willy Wonka in the form of Spike Milligan, but he didn't get the part. Gene Wilder instead got the part through doing a little bit of a stunt involving first coming in all limping and then doing a somersault, which made him say, okay, I finally got the part. And it was quite interesting in terms of the overall backstory that this movie had. But even if I did not read the original novel first, I could safely say that this was a film that I grew up with and had a lot of fond memories in terms of everything that it had to offer, and I still enjoy it to this very day. So let's start off with the story. Now, I really find it very charming and quite easy to follow through and quite well woven. Yes, there may be some parts which might be accused of having plot holes or not making a hell load of sense, but if you take away all of those flaws, you get a very well woven story of a young boy who has lived in not so great conditions and basically wants the best for his family, does everything he can in order to support his family, like getting a job as a newspaper boy, and at the same time, this whole buzz of a chocolate factory owned by the mysterious and quite eccentric Willy Wonka will end up being passed down to people once they receive the golden tickets. And it all leads up to a lot of great adventures in the chocolate factory with the five children, including Charlie. And I found these adventures in the chocolate factory to be very enthralling, very exciting, and it's certainly built up from what we've been getting in the first few scenes. So, despite some minor issues in terms of plot holes and certain things that didn't really make a heckload of sense, I can definitely say that the story was still well done, and you could really feel like you can root for Charlie, especially in his trying times, and you could really enjoy everything that the kids, the parents, and everyone in the chocolate factory had to get themselves into. Now, in terms of the cinematography, it's overall well done, and especially in terms of how the camera was shot, in terms of some close up shots, in terms of some mid shots, it's all really well shot. But I had to give some flack in terms of the effects and in terms of the overall set designs. Don't get me wrong, I really love the look of the candy factory, especially with all of the machinery, which makes a lot of these really wonderful looking candies. And I especially love the goose that lays golden eggs scene. Well, in the original novel, you have squirrels which test which nuts are good and which nuts are bad. But in this film, you have geese who lay golden eggs to see which ones are good and ready to be polished, and which ones are bad and are basically going to be thrown down the chute. So you could really tell that this film screams 70s, from the effects to some of the designs, some of the costumes, and just the overall look of this film makes it quite dated to this very day. The guiltiest culprit, and I'm sure that a lot of my reviewer friends and fellow reviewers have pointed this out, is definitely the chocolate river. Well, it didn't really look like chocolate. I sort of thought it looked more artificial, and it just looked kinda super fake. In fact, Michael Bollner stated in an interview that the chocolate river was stinky, dirty, brown water. And I could definitely believe that because even back then when I was a kid, I used to think it was just rivers of chocolate milk. But as I grew up, I could definitely see why people were not really in favor of this chocolate river because it looked really artificial. It looked rather fake and it just didn't really grab people's attention. According to what I've researched on Wikipedia, they stated that they were going to use cocoa powder to make it look more chocolatey, but that did not work out very well. So, yes, the biggest flaw of the overall effects and the overall designs is that they were basically a product of their time, which was basically the 70s, and it still doesn't really hold up to this very day. But what you get from the cinematography is a sense of wonder, a sense of charm in its own special way, and just a sense of uniqueness which make it really stand out pretty well. And not to mention, the machinery found in the factory is just totally awesome. And the music is absolutely gorgeous. You really have to give the likes of Leslie Bricusse, Anthony Newley, and Walter Scharf great amounts of credit for composing really whimsical and gorgeous songs, especially from the opening credits. And when you see the opening credits, especially to how the chocolate is made, you cannot help but feel so immersed in the world that you're going to get yourself into. It is that wonderful. It really grabbed my attention and it did it in such a masterful way. And as I stated before, my favorite musical numbers in this film are without a doubt Pure Imagination, I Want It Now, the Oompa Loompa song, I've Got a Golden Ticket, and Cheer Up Charlie. The very song which really defines this film is without a doubt Pure Imagination. And this is all in great thanks to Gene Wilder's warm, lyrical baritone voice, which he manages to really hit the notes really well and really proves himself to be a very versatile performer. Speaking of which, there are also moments in which he also sang some lines of von Flotov's Marta, specifically Lionel's aria Ach so from, commonly sung in Italian as Ma pari, and he sings that one line, Marta, Marta, wo verschwandest mit mir, and he sang that with a lot of charm, with that deadpan sound, and I thought it was absolutely well done, and it was quite hilarious. So with that said, I really have to give my hat off to all the three composers who composed such a very charming and very enjoyable score. The characters are equally as charming and equally as interesting. Now, the book version of Charlie Bucket and the movie version of Charlie Bucket are really different. According to Matt Guion from his Books versus Movies reviews, the major difference between Charlie from the original Roald Dahl novel to the 1971 Charlie is that in the Roald Dahl novel, Charlie is basically the super good kid and he basically wins the entire shebang by default. But with the 1971 Charlie, he basically is a good kid, but he's still a kid nonetheless. He has his flaws, he has his moments where he screws up and at times is kind of selfish, but ultimately he does the right thing, especially in the climax of the film, which I dare not spoil. You really have to catch it for yourself to see what I mean. And I could definitely say that Charlie in the 1971 Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is definitely a character I deeply enjoy, mostly because he has a great amount of charm, likability, and believability, and great amounts of dimension that make his character come alive. He's just like an everyday boy who cares for his family, but at the same time has his own set of flaws, his own set of quirks, and a lot of facets which really make him interesting and stand out as a very great kid character. Mrs. Bucket is a very warm and loving mother, and she's just definitely a very genuine character on screen. Grandpa Joe is made of a lot of wind. Yeah, he's a stubborn old man, but his stubbornness is actually part of his charm, as he has that really childlike and childish nature, which really make him come alive as a character and makes him very enjoyable to watch. And you could really see that fierce support and that love that he gives to his own grandson. Willy Wonka is a very fascinating and very enjoyable enigma. He has one of the greatest lines in this movie, and he says them whether it be all deadpan or with such great fire and passion or in a very charming and very sweet way. What's also worth mentioning is that Gene Wilder at times also spoke other languages, like when he introduced the boat, he was talking in French. And when he introduced his factory, he was talking in German. So I found it really interesting, and you could definitely see the great amount of quirks that really make this character come alive and really make him very, very enjoyable. And now we go to the bratty kids. Augustus Gloop, even though he doesn't really have a lot to say in this film, is still pretty enjoyable and rather hilarious. Violet Beauregard has that major tendency to be quite pushy, kind of mean, but ultimately comes off as pretty obnoxious and kind of bratty. But she's not unlikable. She definitely has that type of brat element that makes her shine as a character in her own special way. Veruca Salt definitely steals the show out of all the bratty kids. She is definitely the one that has the most personality, and for that, she even got her own song. Which is no surprise because I definitely enjoyed every single moment Veruca was on screen. Every time she pouted, every time she shouted, every time she sulked, I just can't help but enjoy and get myself immersed into this character. I know I'm supposed to hate the bratty kid stereotype, but when you have Veruca Salt into the mix, you really have to give her credit for making this character kind of likable in her own special way. Mike TV basically comes off as a bratty know-it-all kid who thinks he knows everything about television and thinks he's such a major smartass, but part of that comes from a charm and likability in which he manages to embody in his own special way. With Slugworth, yeah, I was kind of creeped out by this character when I was a kid, but he's still kind of interesting in his own special way. Bill the Candyman, even though he has a very short amount of screen time, really displays a lot of likability and charm, mostly thanks to a song The Candyman Can, and he definitely has a warm and caring soul, even though he has a very limited amount of screen time. In terms of Mr. Turkentine, Charlie's teacher, he's a very enjoyable character in which he manages to be rather sarcastic, snarky, and just manages to be a great load of fun to watch on screen. The Oompa Loompas are really entertaining, even though they don't really stand out from each other, but still have their own set of charm and likability to make them very enjoyable. With Grandma Josephine, Grandpa George, and Grandma Georgina, they have their own set of quirks and likability, but it's ultimately Grandma Josephine that is definitely someone with the most lines and definitely someone who's kind of enjoyable in her own special way. Mrs. Salt comes off as really deadpan, but has a good amount of charm to her. Mr. Salt, oh sweet lord, I do feel sorry for this gentleman who manages to get himself pushed around by Veruca's orders, and I just feel rather sorry for this guy. You could definitely tell that he is such a mess, especially with dealing with his own daughter. He gives her everything she wants, and she continues to browbeat him. And I just think to myself, poor Mr. Salt. Mr. Beauregard is really entertaining. In the film, he is a fast-talking used car salesman, and he definitely is someone who is so much of a motor mouth, and he's basically that type of guy who you're supposed to not like, but you can't help but feel completely charmed by everything he has to say. Mrs. TV is very much an overworked geography and history teacher, and she pretty much has to put up with Mike's TV antics all the time, and I can't help but feel rather sorry for her, even though she comes off as kind of desensitized. But without a doubt, the characters I definitely love the most are, without a doubt, the Oompa Loompas, Willy Wonka, Charlie, and Grandpa Joe. And of course, Veruca Salt. She was definitely the one that stood out among the bratty kids. So what more can I say about the characters? They have their own sets of charm, they have their own sets of likability, and their own sets of what makes them great as their own characters. The acting is really well done. What more can I say about a gentleman like Gene Wilder? He really knew how to portray Willy Wonka and embody this character to the point where he was Willy Wonka. He managed to make him so hilarious, and especially that tunnel scene. I know that scene creeped out a lot of people, and I know that it came out of nowhere, but the fact that you really get to see him reciting that little poem in the tunnel scene and then screaming his lungs out is just an absolute testament to really witnessing how versatile he is as a character. And you could definitely see the quirks, charm, and lovability which he brings out to this character. And that is coming from someone who is versatile, charming, and just grand as both an actor and a comedian, and he managed to deliver everything really naturally. Jack Albertson as Grandpa Joe does very well with his stubbornness, and he's a pretty good singer, especially considering I've Got a Golden Ticket. He managed to sing it pretty well, and Peter Ostrom as Charlie is just made a pure win. He made him very multidimensional, he made him a great character in his own right, and he was just very charming overall. Michael Bollner was quite entertaining as Augustus Gloop. Back then, he wasn't really that fluent in English, and he basically had the least number of lines, but he managed to make Augustus rather enjoyable in his own special way. Julie Dawn Cole stole the show as Veruca Salt when it comes to the bratty kids. She has that sharp tongue, that sharp presence on screen, and just that bombastic nature and that bodacious attitude which she brings out wonderfully with great aplomb. And this was from someone who was about 13 or 14 years old at the time, and I could definitely tell that she had a major ball playing this really iconic bratty character. Denise Nickerson really gave Violet Beauregard's simple-minded nature, yet also gave her a charm and likability that made her a lot of fun to watch on screen, especially considering the part where she turns into a giant blueberry. Now, that was pretty enjoyable. And Denise Nickerson also starred in shows like Electric Company as one of the kids named Allison, and she was pretty well known in the 70s and 80s as a child and teen actress at the time. And I thought that with Violet Beauregard, this has definitely become one of the finest roles she's ever done. Paris Theman really knew how to give Mike TV's sense of smartass with a sense of childlike wonder to this character, and he balances it really, really well. And his smartass attitude as Mike TV was definitely something to behold. Aubrey Woods as Bill, the candy store owner, injects his character with a lot of charm and lovability, especially evidenced in his song The Candyman Can. David Batley as Mr. Turkentine injects his character with a great amount of snark, charm, and just a lot of wit to really make this character come alive. Gunther Meisner as Slugworth manages to make this character kind of creepy, but kind of fascinating in his own enigmatic way. Ursula Wright as Mrs. Gloop was an absolute riot and really knew how to handle this thankless character with a lot of fun and charm. Leonard Stone as Mr. Beauregard really knew how to manage Sam Beauregard's motormouth-like delivery in such a very fine and masterful way. Roy Kinnear is just a riot as Mr. Salt. You could definitely see how much of a tough job it was for him to really portray an overworked dad who very much had to give into the demands of his pampered daughter. Nora Denny, aka Dodo Denny, really knew how to play up Mrs. TV's intelligent, smart-mouthed nature in a way that is not self-conscious, but really came off as natural. So with that said, all the acting in this film was really well done. And special kudos also has to go to Diana Sowell for really embodying Charlie's mom with a great amount of lovability and charm and really making this wonderful character role come alive. Despite certain facets of this film that feel rather dated by today's standards, I still have to give Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory great amounts of kudos for really standing the test of time in terms of its story and characters. And with that said, I give this film a 4 out of 5 stars. Yes, I kind of had to knock it down because of the very dated effects. And of course, it was basically a product of its time considering that this was filmed in the 70s. But with the strong story, lovable characters, and a great cast headed by Gene Wilder, this was definitely something I can recommend. And for those of you who have watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, let me know your experiences and opinions about this film. Do you still like this film? Do you like it but feel like your own love for this film has been waning about? Or do you love this film regardless? Let me know in the comments below. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in much later for my review of Miss Hokusai. And this review also doubles as a tribute to Gene Wilder, who embodied Willy Wonka with a great amount of charm and lovability and great amounts of versatility as well. Will I also review the other installment, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? I'm not so sure. But I'm still gonna keep Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory close to my heart. So until then, have a great day, everybody. And to Mr. Gene Wilder, thank you so much for everything you had to give in the world of film and television. Thank you so much for your charm. Thank you so much for your warmth and lovability. And thank you so much for being a very entertaining individual. May you rest in peace, my good man.